Another wild $1 million cash game came to a close yesterday, and there are two hands specifically from Alan Keating that people are going insane over. Let's go ahead and jump into the action. The lineup we had for this game, lots of familiar faces with Texas Mike, Airball, Haralabus, Peter, Keating. We did have a couple of new players entering the arena. Stanley Tang, one of the founders of DoorDash, and Brandon Stevens, well-known high-stakes player in a lot of private games around the country. The hand gets going with a pretty ambitious statement from Ryan Feldman. Usually you want to under-promise and over-deliver, but I will say this hand is pretty great. Action begins at 501k 2k with a 2k ante, and we see a raise here in the low jack from Nik Airball with 6-4 of diamonds, certainly the standard play. Action now folds around the table, and Keating looks down at another premium hand here for the $1 million game, 8-4 offsuit. I think the thinking here is that these are two cards and people are watching, so you should play them. And now Haralabus looks at another premium 7-3 offsuit. Surprised to see Haralabus get away from such a premium holding in this spot, but he does make the conservative laydown. We're taking a flop with two hands below 9 high. The flop is Cooler City. Both players are ready to go to war. We have top two pair for Alan Keating and an open-ended straight flush draw for Nik Airball, a gigantic hand here on the flop. So both players, extremely strong hands. We are $1 million deep. This is where the best hands are made. Keating checks over to Nik Airball. This is definitely a hand you want to bet. Your hand is incredibly strong. Time to build this pot. He decides to bet $5,000. I like this size from Nik. I think it makes a lot of sense. Over to Alan Keating now with top two. Certainly a hand you want to be doing a lot of check raising with. And when you do check raise, you probably want to make it a reasonable size, so you could maybe check raise with hands like ace 8 or king 8. But Alan actually goes a little bit bigger, making it $35,000. I think this size may be a touch too big, but at the end of the day, definitely want to be raising for value when you flop top two. Back over to Nik Airball, open-ended straight flush draw. Couple ways you can play this. Certainly fine to play most of your hands as calls here. Slow down. Play in position. If you get there, you can value bet. You basically get a chance to be really efficient with the way you play later streets. Or you can put in the bet 3-bet here and get aggressive. I mean, if your opponent has even, let's just say, for example, a flush draw, you could win when you pair or you hit your straight, and two of the flush outs actually give you a straight flush, so you're not too worried about even the draws that dominate you. And then if your opponent does happen to have a set or top two once in a while, you have tons of equity. I mean, we can see here he's up against top two, and he's almost a 50% favorite to win this hand, a little bit less than that given whatever cards are dead. The point here is I don't mind either way from Nik Airball. I do think once players start to raise big sizes, it makes sense to just do more calling, which is what Nik decides to do. And let's take a turn. The turn comes a 3 pairing the board. Very interesting card now. So essentially, it's a little less likely that Alan Keating actually has a strong hand. It's less likely he has 4-3. It's less likely he has 8-3. This card is actually very bad for the player that check raised, because the player that raised pre-flop has all of the over pairs, and Alan Keating should be check raising very often with just a 3. It's also worth noting that the 8 is the non-diamond card here. So let's just say you had a pair and a flush draw. Can't have that with a 3 either, so it's very difficult to have trips in this situation. You've got a feel for Nik Airball here. Huge draw, and what a buzzkill for this turn to pair. But you know what's not a buzzkill? The fact that I'm giving away 10,000 sweeps coins over on Club WPT Gold. All you got to use is code Doug and purchase coins this week to be entered. There'll be 20 winners that will win 500 sweeps coins. Anyone can enter that has used code Doug either before this week or after. All you got to do, purchase coins, and you're in there. We're going to announce the winners on this Sunday's stream. Back to the action here. So the question is, how do both players navigate this very tricky scenario? Neither player is super pumped to see this turn. I think in general, in this situation for Keating, I think you should do lots of checking. This card, again, very bad for the player that check raised. Less hands you have for value. And then typically the way you want to play this, you do lots of checking. You do a good amount of check folding because this card's bad for you. And then you do actually get in for the double check raise a decent amount because there are draws. Keating might want to check raise the turn. And you, of course, can have a few boats. Keating decides to go ahead and continue to barrel. I really don't like this that much. I think your hand is too weak to be betting $60,000 into $85,000. but Keating does seem to think he's ahead, and to his credit, he is. Over to Nik Airball now, straight flush draw. How does he want to proceed? It is a situation that's kind of interesting because when Keating bets this turn, he's almost saying he has a boat, really, right? Because he's not going to be betting this turn this size with a hand like an 8, or rather he shouldn't be really because he loses to 9s, 10s plus. And then he shouldn't be barreling this turn with hands like a 4. He shouldn't really have hands like a 3 in his check raise range. So when Keating bets this big on the turn, he's very, very, very polarized. That makes me like just calling here in position in Nick's shoes. Little tip at home, guys, the more polarized your opponent seems, the more you should just call in position and look to play later streets. Because if Keating does have a very good hand, then he's going to be calling you down should you raise. And if he's bluffing, you want to continue to let him have the chance to tell that story. Now, interestingly here, Keating is actually not that strong with his 8-4. His 2-pair has been counterfeit, so he loses to these overpairs. So it's actually not a very good spot should he get raised. And maybe Nik Airball senses that with a turn raise here to $230,000 to go. A good-sized raise here on the turn, almost a 4x versus this bet. What is Nik Airball representing now? Well, he's kind of saying, frankly, that he has a boat, or a hand like ace-3 suited that bet the flop called the raise. So in this situation, it's a bit peculiar because if Nick has a full house, he might be inclined to just call and let Alan improve. If, let's say, for example, Alan's bluffing, he could hit his draws, or maybe he might barrel the river. Maybe he might get there. Those are all things you like to see with a boat. So I would say Nik Airball is representing ace-3, maybe 4-3, maybe a few hands. But again, Alan's almost repping a boat here with this turn bet. So my big takeaway here, I don't like raising the turn with anything. Yes, it does look very good when Alan has 8-4, but your opponent's extremely polarized. I would just call and play this in position. Back over to Alan when he has the 3 pair here up against this raise. Very difficult scenario now for Alan. I will say I kind of like having 8-4 here because I don't think Nik Airball is ever raising with the overpairs in this spot. It just doesn't make sense to raise. So really, Nik Airball is saying he has a full house or maybe ace-3, and you do block pretty much all the full houses. You block 8-8, you block 4-4, you block 4-3 suited. So all of those hands now are much less likely given you're holding. So I do like a call here from Alan, which he does decide to make, and let's take a river. The river is an interesting offsuit ace, so maybe 5 deuce gets there, but that doesn't really matter. Other than that, it does not change the board all that often, other than the fact that ace-3 is now a full house. Keating checks with his 3 pair that cannot be thrilled here. If Nik Airball does have an ace and he checks back, he'll win this pot. So you have to be somewhat concerned that even if Nick was bluffing, he's moved ahead of you. Eventually, though, Airball does decide to fire up $525,000 on this river, basically saying that he has this full house he's been representing. And for Keating, that's actually in some ways kind of good news. It means that he did not hit that ace on the river, unless, of course, he has ace-3. So this bet from Nik Airball, I just want to take a note here for viewers at home. You typically want to avoid doing what Nick does here, where he bets $525K and leaves $267 behind. Usually in these spots, you either want to use a smaller size in this situation, so like a 2/3 pop bet and leave like $400 or $500K behind, or you want to simply just go all in. The solver will rarely leave like some table changed cab fare home, although I guess it's a very nice cab for $267,000. So in this situation, if Nick is representing a full house, if he's saying, I have the boat, man, I have a full house here, he wants to just go all in to try and stack the lower full houses or trips or whatever he thinks Alan Keating might have. So I would like to see Nik Airball move all in if he does decide to bet here. I'll also say I don't love bluffing with this hand in Airball's shoes. I really would like Keating to have hands like or have cards like the 6 of diamonds, the 5 of diamonds. I want Keating to have a hand like 6, 5 of diamonds, 7, 5 of diamonds. Maybe King 5 of diamonds. Maybe that's loose. I don't know. Maybe ace deuce of diamonds, or ace 5 of diamonds, ace 6 of diamonds. I want Keating to have these hands that called and now have not improved significantly on the river. Maybe a couple of those hands have hit an ace, but those hands are not full houses. So I don't like bluffing with this hand here in Nik Airball's shoes. I would really love to have a hand that's more like 6-5 of clubs if you're going to make this move. But at the same time, I do think that it's good to sometimes put opponents in tough spots. And I can appreciate that Nik Airball recognizes he's going to have to put his foot in the gas versus Keating in some of these situations. And he has kind of correctly identified that Keating is not that strong here. Back over to Keating now, facing this really weird large bet, and Keating takes his time, guys. This is a long time of thinking it over. And admittedly, you'd want to probably take your time here to think about this. This is a very big decision for a very large pot, and your hand in raw strength isn't that good. 3 pair, counterfeit on the turn. You lose in theory to an ace, right? Now, Alan knows that Nik Airball's not betting an ace here, so really he's saying he has at least a 3, but maybe even just a full house. And isn't 8-4 kind of a beautiful hand? I was watching this hand live and I thought, isn't this kind of a beautiful hand to have in this spot? Because Nik is mainly saying he has 8-8, 4-4, 4-3, and you have 8-4. So you actually block all of the big hands that your opponent is saying that they have. So from that perspective, this is a really interesting hand to call with. Obviously, you're not supposed to have this pre-flop, so in theory land, this hand doesn't exist. But can Keating find the call with this beautiful bluff catcher?
Wow, there's the call.
Wow.
8s and 3s, or 8s and 4s rather, with an ace for Keating. Incredible hero call, and the biggest pot of the night, 1.6 million, is going to head his way.
I love when we ask, can he find the call? I don't know, guys. If he didn't, it would be a pretty shit video, right? So that's the first Keating hand that we saw. They got a lot of people talking about it. The second one, very different style hand, but we've got to talk about it because it is causing some controversy with a really weird decision that Alan Keating made with the second nuts. Let's go ahead and jump into our second hand. This hand begins with a classic Texas Mike open in the low jack with 6 deuce of spades. Peter behind him with ace-7. Don't mind call or 3-bet. Peter does decide to call. Stanley on the button. Looking down at jack-10, he makes the call, which seems like a totally good play. Alan Keating now with ace-queen in the small blind. He can call or raise. They both do make some sense. If this was a non-ante game, I would say don't have calls here pre-flop. But in ante games, certainly can have some calls, and ace-queen strong enough to fit that bill. But I still think I would, generally speaking, prefer to 3-bet, particularly when we have hands this loose from our opponents. I think you want to 3-bet, isolate some players, or even knock them out is totally fine with a hand like ace-queen. The flop comes king, queen, 7, 2 clubs. A lot of players end up with a piece here. We see Stanley with, debatably the best hand that you'd want to have here with an open ender to the nuts on both sides. Peter with bottom pair, top kicker, and the backdoor nut flush draw. Keating with technically the best hand for now, but of course a precarious scenario with middle pair, top kicker. And then Texas Mike also in there with 6 deuce. It's not a very good hand on this board. Action checks to Texas Mike, and he decides to fire $15,000 into 3 players who all hit the board. Generally speaking, at home, guys, I have to recommend probably avoid bluffing into 4 people with 6 high, no equity on boards like this, where it's fairly easy for someone to have connected. Texas Mike does bet $15,000. Now over to Peter. I think this is a spot. Don't mind call. Don't mind raise. If you want to sometimes raise these boards, ace-7 is kind of nice. You block 7-7. You have a backdoor flush draw. You can rep some stuff. But I don't mind call as well. On the button out for Stanley, similar scenario to the situation with Peter. Don't mind call. Don't mind raise. His hand's nice as a call. It's nice as a raise. Don't really mind either way. Stanley does decide to just make the call. Now Keating with the ace-queen, middle pair, top kicker. I really would prefer to see Keating just call here. When your hand is this middling, raising tends to make it so that the hands that beat you continue. You want to keep everyone's ranges nice and wide. And look at these ranges. Nice and wide. Anyway, no one ended up letting go on the flop, so we take a turn and the pot is building. The turn comes the ace of clubs, a somewhat spicy turn as 3 players have improved. Now, no one has improved to the nuts, and there is a flush out there, and not one of these players has even a single club, but 3 players have improved. Top and third pair for Keating, top and bottom pair here for Peter, and Stanley now in the lead with his straight. With the presence of the flush out there, all of the players are at least somewhat concerned, and the action checks all the way around to Stanley on the button. I actually don't mind betting here for Stanley, particularly in games where the ranges are this wide. If you do bet with your straight and you get raised, it's kind of an easy fold because you can just have flushes in the spot and it's a four-way turn. I don't mind check. I think check is also good, but I think sometimes it's nice to be able to bet this turn for value and have hands like two pair or pair plus flush draw call you. Certainly able to get some value on the turn. All in all, though, I would say checking probably the preferred play, which is what Stanley decides to do. So we have a bit of pot control here as we take a river in this four-way pot. The river comes an ace, a gigantic river. Now Keating has the second nuts with ace queen. Peter has the third nuts with ace seven. It is a crazy cooler situation, and maybe that check from Stanley ended up being good after all. The action checks to Peter with his ace seven now, and Peter has to decide, does he want to bet or try and trap Stanley? I think this is a spot you certainly want to be betting. It's unlikely Stanley has all of that good of a hand. He did check back the turn, and it's pretty unlikely the players that called pre-flop in this situation have full houses. Let's just take a step back and think about this. So pre-flop, Texas Mike opens, the loosest player at the table, and not one person 3-bet him. Is it believable that anyone has ace king? I would say no. I think if you have ace king and you see Texas Mike open, you are salivating at the cards Texas Mike might have here. I mean, his cards can't even add up to 9, much less be a strong pre-flop hand. Of course, once in a while, everyone gets a big hand, but the reality is ace king, you're taking your chances versus Texas Mike. So in this situation, it's very unlikely anyone's improved to a boat, and it's also pretty unlikely anyone has ace queen for similar reasons. When you have ace queen against very, very loose players, you typically want to raise as your hand is likely good. So this is a spot where not many players really can have that many full houses other than Texas Mike. Peter decides it's time to bet here with his full house, and he goes for a hefty bet, a hefty bet. I'll also just say one note. I've watched a lot of this game, or rather these $1 million games, and I just feel like in general, it seems like these overbets from people tend to be super, super value heavy. Not that surprising in live poker, people bet large for value, but maybe something to think about in your games when you face giant bets. Likely the nuts, guys. You got to be pretty creative to be bluffing for these sizes, and that was definitely not the case in most of these big pots that we saw over this week. Peter decides about $155,000, a roughly 2x the size of the pot bet, and this is where the hand gets completely insane. Keating with the second nuts, just flats. I mean, what is he thinking here? Why would he do this? It seems insane. How can he expect Texas Mike to raise? Texas Mike has any two cards. I mean, look at his hand. How can he think he's beat? Peter can't even have ace king and 3-bet pre-flop. Why on earth would you call? I mean, I'm trying to imagine what was going through his head. Maybe it went something like this.
Lucky here, Sonny boy. You're never gonna take me alive, Cowher. You think you're gonna trap me on the turn? I'm not gonna fall for your tricks, Sonny boy. Haha, you'll never take me alive.
I'm not saying that Alan Keating looks like a villain from the 1930s, but I'm just saying we should perhaps check the local railroad tracks to see if anyone's tied down. Why would he do this? All right, so I don't think it can be because he's scared of Peter. I just don't believe that. What's the chance that Peter didn't 3-bet ace king? It's just too unlikely. So I don't think he's calling here because he's afraid of Peter. I don't think. It's my personal opinion. I think what Alan Keating is trying to do is he feels like Texas Mike is a pretty trappy, aggressive player and could absolutely spring to life with a river check raise. Perhaps he has a hand like a set the river to boat. Maybe he has like a flush that might raise the river. Maybe he has queen, queen, king, king, 7-7. Maybe he has ace 7. Maybe he's going to bluff. Texas Mike certainly does have a long history of check raising in crazy spots. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. What do you guys think? Why did he call this river? I'm baffled. I'm baffled. Why did he just call the river here? I find it really confusing, and I do have to wonder what his logic was. Let me know in the comments what you think he was thinking. You're never gonna take me alive. Hit subscribe.